Before I tell you what happened, and I promise, I'll tell you every last detail, I want you to know that I never thought I'd be this kind of woman. The kind who has to fight for what's hers, especially against her own flesh and blood. For years, I was just Mom. Reliable, loving, perhaps a bit of a pushover if I'm honest with myself now. My daughter, Clara, well, she was my world. Everything I did, every sacrifice I made, was for her. I worked my fingers to the bone as a lead machinist at the garment factory, standing for hours until my feet swelled and my back ached. All so she could have the education I never did, the opportunities one only dreamed of. My pension, the one I'd diligently contributed to for over 40 years, wasn't just money. It was my security, my independence, my promise to myself that I wouldn't be a burden in my old age. It was the fruit of a lifetime of hard labor, the quiet comfort I looked forward to. So, when Clara, my bright, beautiful Clara, told me I was being foolish keeping it all in one place, that she could help me manage it better, especially with her wedding to Mark coming up and finances being so tight for them, a little warning bell should have rung. But it didn't. Or perhaps it did, a tiny chime I chose to ignore, because this was Clara. My Clara. She said I was being sentimental about a pot of money and that she knew best. She eventually convinced me to consolidate it, give her access just to help, then bit by bit it started to dwindle. And when I finally confronted her, the truth was a cold slap in the face. She'd taken it. All of it. My future, gone. She said it was an investment in her future, her happiness with Mark. She said I was old and wouldn't need it as much as she did. The cruelty of it, the sheer audacity, nearly broke me. But it didn't. Oh no. Because while she thought I was finished, a dried-up old husk, she forgot one thing. I might be old, but I wasn't stupid. And I certainly wasn't defeated. This is the story of how my daughter took my pension, callously and without a flicker of remorse, and how I, in turn, took her lavish wedding fund. Every penny. And I want to know, when you've heard it all, what you would have done in my shoes. Clara had always been ambitious. Even as a little girl, she wanted the best, the shiniest, the most expensive. I'd indulged her where I could, scraping together funds for dance lessons, school trips, the trendy clothes her friends wore. I told myself it was natural for a child to want things, and I was her mother. It was my job to provide. Her father, bless his soul, passed when she was just 12, and perhaps I overcompensated after that, trying to fill the void he left with material things and unwavering support. She did well in school, got a good degree in marketing, and landed a job with a decent firm. I was so proud. She met Mark about 2 years ago. He was charming, I suppose, in a superficial way, good-looking, always dressed impeccably with a smooth line of talk. He worked in finance, something vague with stocks and investments that always sounded impressive, but never seemed to translate into him ever picking up a dinner bill. They made a handsome couple, always out at the newest restaurants, weekends away, an Instagram feed full of curated perfection. The wedding planning started almost immediately after he proposed with a ring that, I suspected, cost more than my car. Clara was ecstatic, consumed by bridal magazines, venue viewings, and dress fittings. She spoke of a dream wedding, a fairy tale day. The budget, she'd mentioned casually, was significant, mostly, she implied, from Mark's excellent prospects and their combined savings. I remember feeling a pang of something I couldn't quite name, perhaps a sense of being on the outside looking in, or maybe a tiny, uncharitable thought about their priorities when they were also complaining about saving for a house deposit. But I pushed it down. She was happy, and that's all that mattered. I even offered to contribute what little I could from my savings, a few £1,000s I'd earmarked for a new boiler, but she'd smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Mom, that's lovely, but we've got it covered. We want everything to be perfect, perfect." That word seemed to be her mantra. The pressure she put on herself, and by extension Mark, for this perfect wedding was immense. Looking back, I see how Mark's influence subtly shifted Clara. She became more dismissive of my old-fashioned ways, less patient with my stories of the factory or her childhood. She was always rushing off, phone glued to her ear, discussing floral arrangements or guest lists. My little flat, once her haven, became just a quick stop for a cup of tea and a download of her latest wedding triumphs or tribulations. I missed the girl who would sit and chat for hours, the one who valued my opinion. But I told myself this was just a phase, the stress of the wedding. I'd get my Clara back once the confetti settled. Oh, how wrong I was. The groundwork for her betrayal was being laid, brick by gilded brick, in the fantasy of that perfect wedding, and I, her ever-loving mother, was too blind, or perhaps too willing, to see it. She knew I had received my pension as a lump sum payout upon retirement, a comfortable nest egg I planned to live on frugally, but securely. She often asked about it. Just to make sure you're okay, Mum. Concern, I thought. Calculation, I now realize. The conversation about my pension started innocuously enough. Clara came over one Sunday, armed with pastries and a worried frown. Mum, she began, her voice laced with that earnest tone she used when she wanted something. Mark and I were talking, and we're a bit concerned about your finances. I remember feeling a flicker of surprise. My finances? I'd always been careful, lived within my means. Concerned how, dear? I asked, pouring her a cup of tea. Well, she continued, stirring her tea with unnecessary vigor, that lump sum you have. It's just sitting there, isn't it? Not really working for you. Inflation, you know. It's probably losing value, Mark, she explained, with his expertise in finance, had suggested some much better options for me. Safe investments, she assured me, that would give me a better return. He could manage it for you, Mum, as a favor. He's so clever with these things, I was hesitant. I liked my money where I could see it, in a straightforward savings account at my local bank. I understood passbooks and statements. The world of stocks and shares felt like a foreign country. Oh, Clara, I don't know. It sounds complicated. And it's my retirement, dear. I need it to be safe, she sighed, a little theatrical puff of air. Mum, honestly, you're being a bit old-fashioned. Keeping it under the mattress, practically. Mark says there are government-backed bonds, things even safer than a bank, that pay more. We just want you to be comfortable, to have more, the more dangled enticingly. Perhaps a little extra for a holiday, or to help with unexpected repairs. But still, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Over the next few weeks, she persisted. Gentle at first, then with increasing impatience. Mark would chip in too, on speakerphone calls, his voice smooth and reassuring, dropping terms like diversification and portfolio management. He made it sound like I was being irresponsible by not letting him handle it. They painted pictures of me running out of money, of struggling. If I didn't take their expert advice, the pressure mounted. She'd call, sounding stressed about wedding costs, and then pivot to my pension, subtly linking her anxieties with my financial naivety. The implication was clear. If I had more, maybe I could help them more. The final push came when she visited, tears in her eyes. Mum, the venue just added some unexpected charges. Mark's a bit stretched this month with some investments that haven't matured. If only your money was working harder, we wouldn't have to worry so much. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple, but I didn't see it clearly then. I saw my daughter, distressed, on the verge of what she kept calling the most important day of her life. My resolve crumbled. All right, dear, I said, my voice barely a whisper. If you and Mark think it's best. The relief on her face was instantaneous, a brilliant, beaming smile that momentarily made me feel I'd done the right thing. The paperwork was produced with suspicious speed. Powers of attorney, account transfer forms. Mark talked me through them, his explanations quick and glossing over the fine print. Just standard stuff, Margaret, he'd said breezily. Gives us the ability to act on your behalf for your benefit, for my benefit. I signed where they told me to sign. Within days, my pension, my life savings, the sum total of 40 years of sweat and thrift, was transferred into an account they controlled. Don't you worry about a thing, Mum, Clara chirped, kissing my cheek. We'll take care of everything, and they did. They took care of it all right. They took it all. The first few months after the transfer were deceptively calm. Clara would give me vague, positive updates whenever I asked. It's doing really well, Mum. Mark's a genius. She'd even transfer a small, regular amount into my current account, a little more than my old state pension, saying it was the interest from my investments. It lulled me into a false sense of security. I started to relax, thinking perhaps they were right. Perhaps I had been foolishly old-fashioned. The wedding plans barreled ahead, grander and more extravagant by the day. A historic stately home for the venue, a couture dress Clara flew to London for fittings for, a guest list that seemed to include everyone they'd ever met. I'd occasionally raise an eyebrow at the escalating costs, but Clara would just wave a dismissive hand. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, Mum. We want it to be memorable. Memorable it would be, but not in the way she imagined. The first real crack in the facade appeared about 6 months later. The interest payment was late. When I called Clara, she was short, a little irritable. "Oh, Mum, sorry, it's just a slight delay with the transfers. Mark's juggling a few things. It'll be there in a day, or 2-inch it wasn't." A week later, still nothing. I called again. This time, her voice was strained. "Look, Mum, there was a small dip in the market. Mark says it's best to leave things settled for a bit. Don't worry, it's all perfectly safe, a small dip." My entire monthly income hadn't arrived. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my composure. I insisted on speaking to Mark. He was all smooth reassurances again, blaming market volatility and temporary liquidity issues. He promised to sort it. But the money didn't come. The following month, the same story. Excuses. Delays. Vague financial jargon that meant nothing to me except that I had no money. I started using my small emergency savings for groceries. The worry became a constant, gnawing presence. I tried to talk to Clara, really talk to her. I went to her flat, determined to get answers. She was addressing wedding invitations, a mountain of expensive, cream-colored cardstock on her polished dining table. "Clara, we need to talk about my money," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't look up. "Mum, I really don't have time for this right now. Mark is handling it. He knows what he's doing, but Clara, I haven't received anything for 2 months. How am I supposed to live?" A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Mum. It's a temporary situation. Honestly, sometimes I think you don't trust us at all, that was it." The accusation, so blatant, so unfair, after I had trusted them with everything. Trust you. I felt a tremor run through me. "Clara, I trusted you with my entire life savings. And now it seems to have vanished." She finally looked at me, her eyes cold. "It hasn't vanished. It's invested. For our future. Mark and I have big plans, Mum. A house, a family. This wedding is just the start. Your little pot of money is helping to secure all of that, my little pot of money." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. "But it's my pension, Clara. It's for my security. Not for your wedding, not for your house." She stood up then, scattering invitations. "And what about my security? My happiness? Don't I deserve that? You had your life. This is mine. And frankly, Mum, you're old. How much longer do you even need money for? It's better off with us, making a real difference." The words hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Old. Too old to need money. A burden. My own daughter. That was the last straw. The love I'd felt, the sacrifices I'd made, all curdled into a sick, heavy lump in my chest. The scales didn't just fall from my eyes, they shattered. I saw her then, not as my beloved child, but as a greedy, selfish stranger wearing her face. I walked out of her flat without another word, the sound of her indifferent pen scratching on expensive paper echoing behind me. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The walk home from Clara's flat was a blur of cold fury and profound grief. Each callous word she'd uttered replayed in my mind. "Your little pot of money, you're old, better off with us." It was as if a surgeon had expertly, cruelly, excised a part of my heart. The daughter I knew, or thought I knew, was gone, replaced by this grasping, entitled creature. When I got back to my small, quiet flat, the silence was deafening. It mocked me with memories of Clara's laughter, her childhood drawings still blue-tacked to the fridge, the small, framed photo of us on her graduation day, her arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming. How had we come to this? For a day or two, I was adrift in a sea of despair. I barely ate. I replayed every conversation, every decision, wondering where I'd gone so wrong, how I'd failed to see the warning signs. Was it my fault for indulging her too much? For not being firmer? The self-blame was a heavy cloak. But then something shifted. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, more like the slow, determined turn of a tide. The grief remained, a dull ache that I knew would probably never fully disappear, but alongside it a new feeling began to stir, resolve. A cold, hard anger that paradoxically cleared my head. She thought I was old and finished? She thought she could just discard me after bleeding me dry? No. Absolutely not. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to be dismissed so easily. My pension wasn't just money, it was my dignity, my independence. And she had stolen it. That word, stolen, solidified in my mind. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a bad investment choice she'd made on my behalf. This was theft, cloaked in familial concern. And as that realization hardened, so did my determination to fight back. My mind, surprisingly sharp despite the emotional turmoil, began to work. If she had taken my security, my future, then what did she value that I could, in turn, leverage? The answer was blindingly obvious: her perfect wedding. The lavish, ostentatious affair that had become the center of her universe, funded, I now suspected, at least in part by my stolen pension. The irony was bitter, but also potent. She and Mark had talked endlessly about their wedding fund, a substantial sum squirreled away in a dedicated account. Clara had even boasted about how they'd meticulously saved, how every detail was budgeted for. That fund was her dream, and it was going to be my leverage. The first practical step was to understand my legal position. I knew nothing about lawyers or lawsuits. The thought was intimidating, but the image of Clara's dismissive face, her casual cruelty, spurred me on. I remembered a neighbor, old Mrs. Henderson, mentioning a solicitor who had helped her with a contentious probate issue. A very sharp woman, she'd called her. Ms. Davies. The name stuck. I found the number for a local firm, Harrison and Lowe, and asked for her. My hand trembled as I dialed, but my voice, when I spoke to the receptionist, was surprisingly firm. I needed to see Ms. Davies. It was urgent. My first meeting with her was in a small, book-lined office. Ms. Davies was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with keen, intelligent eyes and a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. I poured out my story, the words tumbling over each other. The years of sacrifice, the trust I'd placed in Clara, the details of the pension transfer, her devastating dismissal of me. I expected judgment, perhaps even pity. Instead, Ms. Davies listened patiently, taking meticulous notes, her expression unreadable but attentive. When I finally finished, close to tears but holding them back, she leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Albright," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "what your daughter and her fiancé have done appears to be a severe breach of trust and, potentially, a criminal act of fraud and theft by misappropriation of funds given under power of attorney." Hearing it put so starkly, so legally, was both shocking and validating. "What I want," I said, my voice gaining strength, "is my money back. Or, if that's not possible, I want what they value most to be put at risk until they make restitution." I told her about the wedding fund. Ms. Davies's eyes sharpened. "Do you have any documentation regarding the pension transfer? The power of attorney? Any written communication about how the money was to be managed?" I did. I had kept copies of everything, a lifelong habit of caution that Clara had often mocked as hoarding. I had the transfer slips, the power of attorney document Mark had so breezily explained, even a few emails where Clara had initially assured me the money was growing. "Excellent," Ms. Davies said, a hint of steel in her tone. "This gives us a strong foundation. We can issue a formal letter of demand for the return of your pension. If they fail to comply, we can initiate civil proceedings to recover the funds." And if we can demonstrate they used your pension for their own expenses, including wedding deposits, we may be able to place a freezing injunction on their assets, including this wedding fund, pending the outcome of the legal action. A freezing injunction. The words sounded powerful, decisive. A small, cold smile touched my lips for the first time in weeks. Yes, I said. That sounds like exactly what we need to do. The old, sentimental Margaret was fading. A new, more resolute version was taking her place. Clara had wanted my money for her future. Now her future was going to pay for my present. Ms. Davies was a whirlwind of calm efficiency. Over the next few weeks, we meticulously assembled our case. I provided her with every scrap of paper, every email, every remembered conversation. She had me write a detailed timeline of events, from Clara's first mention of managing my pension to her final, callous dismissal. Reliving it all was painful, like prodding a raw wound, but Ms. Davies's professional detachment helped me stay focused. She explained the legal jargon in plain English, ensuring I understood every step. The power of attorney they had you sign, she clarified, pointing to a clause in the document, stipulated that they must act in your best financial interests. Using your pension fund for their personal expenses, such as a lavish wedding, is a clear violation of that fiduciary duty. It's not just morally reprehensible, it's legally actionable. Her words were a balm to my bruised spirit. I wasn't just an old woman being dramatic. I was a victim of a serious financial transgression. Ms. Davies drafted a formal letter before action. It was a formidable document, laying out the facts in cold, hard legalese, detailing the amount of my pension that had been misappropriated. We calculated it to be just over £75,000, the entirety of my lump sum, and demanding its immediate return within 14 days. It also stated our intention to pursue all legal avenues, including reporting the matter to the police for fraud, should they fail to comply. We'll send this recorded delivery to both Clara and Mark, Ms. Davies said, her expression serious. They won't be able to ignore it. The thought of Clara receiving that letter, seeing her actions laid bare in such stark terms, gave me a grim satisfaction. I imagined her initial shock, then perhaps a flicker of fear. Or would it just be more anger, more denial? I braced myself for the fallout. As we waited for their response, or lack thereof, Ms. Davies began preparing the groundwork for a freezing injunction application. This was more complex. To get a freezing order, Mrs. Albright, she explained, we need to convince a judge that there's a real risk they might dissipate their assets, spend the money, or move it, before we can get a judgment against them. Given their apparent willingness to misuse your funds, I believe we have a strong case. She hired a discreet private investigator, a former financial crimes detective, to try and ascertain the current location and status of Clara's wedding fund. It felt like something out of a television drama, but Ms. Davies assured me it was standard practice in such cases. The investigator, a quiet, methodical man named Mr. Peterson, was remarkably effective. Within a week, he confirmed that a joint savings account in Clara and Mark's names, with a balance substantial enough to cover a significant wedding, was held at a prominent high street bank. He even managed to get an idea of recent large withdrawals, likely for deposits on the venue, caterers, and that couture dress. Each piece of information was like a stepping stone across a treacherous river. I felt myself growing stronger, more determined. The fear was still there, a knot in my stomach whenever I thought of confronting Clara directly, but it was overshadowed by a cold, righteous anger. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about justice. It was about showing Clara, and the world if necessary, that I would not be trampled on. During this time, I also started making my own quiet preparations. I went through my small flat, sorting through years of accumulated belongings. I found old photo albums, Clara's school reports, little trinkets she'd given me over the years. Each item was a fresh stab of pain. I packed them away in a box, labeled Clara, Past, and stored it in the attic. It was a symbolic act of severing, of acknowledging that the daughter I remembered was no longer the person who existed. I also started looking into alternative, more modest living arrangements just in case. The thought of being dependent, of being a burden, was my greatest fear. This fight was, in essence, a fight for my continued independence. The 14 days stipulated in the letter before action passed without a word from Clara or Mark. No phone call, no email, no registered letter in response. Just silence. Their silence is telling, Ms. Davies remarked, her lips tightening. It suggests they either don't take this seriously, or they have no intention of returning the money. Either way, it strengthens our position for an urgent injunction. The next step was court. The application for the freezing injunction was made ex parte, meaning Clara and Mark wouldn't be present or even aware of the hearing until after the order was granted, if it was. Ms. Davies explained this was crucial to prevent them from moving the money once they knew we were targeting it. I didn't attend the hearing myself. Ms. Davies said it wasn't necessary and might be too stressful for me. Instead, I waited at her office, nerves jangling, sipping cup after cup of lukewarm tea. The hours crawled by. Every time the phone rang, I jumped. Finally, late in the afternoon, Ms. Davies returned. She looked tired but had a small, triumphant smile on her face. "We got it, Mrs. Albright," she said, placing a thick, official-looking document on the desk between us. The judge agreed there's a significant risk of dissipation of assets. He's granted an interim freezing order on their joint account, up to the value of your stolen pension, plus potential legal costs. They'll be served with this order tomorrow morning. Their bank will also be notified, and the funds will be frozen immediately. Relief washed over me, so potent it left me weak. I sagged back in my chair, my eyes stinging. So, they can't touch the wedding fund? Not a penny of the amount specified in the order, Ms. Davies confirmed. They will be able to access any funds above that amount, if there are any, and they can apply to the court for living expenses, but the bulk of it, the money we believe is earmarked for the wedding, will be locked down tight until our civil claim for your pension is resolved. The next morning, I pictured the scene. The process server arriving at Clara and Mark's trendy apartment, handing over the stark white envelope containing the court order. I imagined Clara's carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. The news, when it reached them, must have hit like a thunderbolt. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. Caller ID showed Clara. My heart hammered against my ribs. I let it ring, then ring again, before finally steeling myself and answering. "Hello, Clara." Her voice was not the cold, dismissive tone I'd heard last. It was shrill, hysterical. "Mom, what have you done? What in God's name have you done? Our bank account is frozen. The wedding money. It's all frozen. How could you do this to me?" There was no apology, no remorse, just pure, unadulterated fury and victimhood. "Clara," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "I believe the legal term is securing assets pending recovery of stolen funds, my stolen funds, to be precise. My pension, which you and Mark took." "Stolen?" she shrieked. "We didn't steal anything. It was an investment. Mark was managing it. This is a disaster. The caterers need their final payment next week. My dress. The venue. This will ruin everything." "Yes," I said quietly. "I imagine it will. Perhaps now you have some small inkling of how I felt when I discovered my entire retirement fund had vanished into your investments." There was a pause. Then Mark's voice came on the line, smoother than Clara's but with an undercurrent of panic. "Margaret, there must be some mistake. This is incredibly aggressive. We were always going to make sure you were looked after. This legal action is completely unnecessary." "Unnecessary?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. "I haven't received a penny of my own money for months, Mark. I've been living on fumes. When I tried to discuss it, your fiancé told me I was old and didn't need it. So, you tell me, what was necessary?" He started to bluster about market fluctuations and temporary setbacks, the same tired lines he'd used before. I cut him off. "Save it, Mark. I have a very good lawyer. Ms. Davies. Perhaps your lawyer can speak to her. The court order is quite clear. My pension is to be repaid. Until then, your wedding fund remains frozen." I could hear Clara sobbing, almost wailing, in the background. "You can't do this. I hate you. I hate you," she screamed, snatching the phone back. The raw venom in her voice was shocking, yet, in a strange way, it solidified my resolve further. This wasn't my loving daughter pushed to an extreme. This was her true self, stripped of its charming veneer. The feeling is becoming mutual, Clara, I said, my voice cold as ice. You had a choice. You chose to steal from your mother. Now you're facing the consequences. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly, but my heart strangely steady. The first major blow had been struck. The perfect wedding was teetering on the brink. The days that followed were a barrage of escalating hysteria from Clara and increasingly desperate, wheedling calls from Mark. First came the threats. Clara screamed that she would never speak to me again, that I was dead to her, that I had ruined her life. Mark hinted at counterlegal action for defamation or harassment, empty bluster that Miss Davies quickly dismissed when I related. Then came the attempts at emotional blackmail. Clara would call, sobbing, talking about how all her dreams were shattered, how I was a cruel, unnatural mother for doing this to my only child just weeks before her wedding. She reminded me of her father, saying he would be ashamed of me. That particular barb stung, but I held firm. Your father, I retorted coolly, would be ashamed of a daughter who stole her mother's life savings to fund a wedding she couldn't afford. Mark tried a different tack, appealing to my better nature, asking if we couldn't sort this out like family, perhaps a payment plan, a partial return of funds. The time for sorting this out like family passed when you both decided my pension was your personal slush fund, I told him. Ms. Davies is handling all communication from now on. The pressure was immense. There were moments, late at night, when the old maternal guilt would try to creep back in. Was I being too harsh? Was there another way? But then I would remember Clara's cold eyes as she told me I was old, her casual dismissal of my distress, and the image of my empty bank account, the stark reality of what they had done to my security. And my resolve would harden again. Ms. Davies was my rock through all of this. She handled their increasingly frantic lawyers with calm professionalism, reiterating our position: full repayment of the £75,000, plus my legal costs, and the freezing order would be lifted. Not a penny less. They're panicking, Mrs. Albright, she told me after one particularly acrimonious call with Mark's solicitor. They clearly don't have other liquid assets to cover the wedding expenses and repay you. They were relying entirely on that frozen account. And it seems the wedding is very, very soon indeed. The date was less than a month away. Invitations had long been sent. Deposits had been paid, presumably some for my money. The final, much larger, payments were now due. The caterers, the florist, the venue itself, all would be demanding their balances. Without access to their main wedding fund, Clara and Mark were in an impossible position. One evening, there was a knock on my door. It was Clara. Alone. She looked dreadful. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, her expensive clothes rumpled. She looked broken. For a fleeting moment, the old maternal instinct surged. I almost reached out to her. "Mum," she began, her voice hoarse, devoid of its usual shrillness. "Please. You have to stop this. Please. The wedding, it's all falling apart. We'll be humiliated. Humiliation is a powerful teacher, Clara," I said, my voice softer than I intended, but still firm. I didn't invite her in. We stood in the doorway, a chasm between us. "But this isn't about humiliating you. This is about you returning what you stole from me." "We can't," she cried, fresh tears welling. "Not all of it. Not right now. Mark made some bad investments with some of it. It's not all there anymore." The admission hung in the air. So, not only had they stolen it, but they'd also been reckless with it. My carefully saved pension, gambled away. The last vestiges of any sympathy I might have harbored evaporated. "Then you have a very serious problem, don't you?" I said, my voice hardening again. "Because Ms. Davies is quite insistent. Full repayment, or the wedding fund remains frozen, and we proceed to a full civil trial to recover my money. And given your admission now, Mark might also be facing charges of fraudulent investment and further misuse of funds under power of attorney." Her face went white. "You wouldn't, Mum. He's my fiancé. We're supposed to be getting married." And I was supposed to be able to afford to eat and pay my bills in my retirement, Clara. I retorted. You made your choices. You chose Mark and his clever financial schemes over your mother's well-being. You chose a lavish wedding over honesty and integrity. She stared at me, desperation etched on her face. What do you want from me? She whispered. Blood. I want my money back, Clara, I said, my voice flat. Every single penny you took. Find it. Borrow it. Sell that ridiculously expensive ring Mark gave you. I don't care how. But until my solicitor confirms the full amount is back in my account, that wedding fund stays locked tighter than a drum. She looked down, defeated. The fight seemed to drain out of her. I don't know what to do, she mumbled, more to herself than to me. Then I suggest you and Mark put your heads together and figure it out, I said, stepping back slightly, making it clear the conversation was over. You were clever enough to take it. Be clever enough to return it. I closed the door, leaving her standing alone on my doorstep. There was no triumph, just a profound weariness and a deep, aching sadness for the daughter I had truly lost. But beneath it, there was also the unyielding strength of someone who had been pushed too far and had finally decided to push back. Hard. The final act of this sorry drama played out with a speed that surprised even Ms. Davies. Faced with the implosion of their wedding, the very real threat of legal escalation beyond just the civil claim, and presumably, the dawning realization that I would not back down, Clara and Mark capitulated. It was Mark's parents, in the end, who bailed them out, though I suspect it was done through gritted teeth and with considerable lecturing. Ms. Davies received a call from their solicitor a few days after Clara's disastrous visit to my flat. They were prepared to transfer the full £75,000, plus my agreed legal fees, immediately, on the condition that the freezing order was lifted upon receipt of cleared funds and that I would not pursue any further criminal charges against Mark regarding the mismanagement of my pension. Ms. Davies consulted me. The decision on criminal charges is ultimately yours, Mrs. Albright. However, our primary goal was the recovery of your money, and this offer achieves that. Pursuing criminal charges would be lengthy, stressful, and the outcome uncertain, though I believe there would be a case to answer. I thought about it long and hard. Did I want to see Mark in court, potentially jailed? Part of me, the angry, betrayed part, screamed yes. But another, more weary part, just wanted this nightmare to be over. I wanted my peace back even more than I wanted revenge. Let it be, Ms. Davies, I said finally. As long as my money is returned in full and they understand that any future contact will be through you, I am content to let the matter rest there. Their humiliation and the loss of their grand wedding will be punishment enough. The transfer was made the next day. I watched the figures appear in my new bank account, an account only I controlled, with a profound sense of relief and vindication. It was done. My life savings, my security, painstakingly earned and carelessly stolen, were restored. Ms. Davies formally notified the court, and the freezing order on Clara and Mark's wedding fund was lifted. What was left of it, after a portion had presumably been clawed back by Mark's parents to cover the repayment to me, I neither knew nor cared. Their wedding, I heard later through neighborhood gossip, did not go ahead as planned. The stately home, the couture dress, the hundreds of guests, all were cancelled, presumably at great financial loss from forfeited deposits. They ended up having a small, subdued ceremony at a local registry office a few months later, with only a handful of witnesses. There were no glossy photos on social media this time. The perfect fairy tale had become a quiet, almost shameful affair. I felt a pang, not of triumph, but of melancholy. This wasn't how a mother should feel about her daughter's wedding day. But Clara had sown the wind, and she had reaped the whirlwind. She had made her choices, prioritizing greed and vanity over love and duty, and now she was living with the consequences. I never heard from her directly again after that day. I closed the door on her. No apology, no explanation, no attempt at reconciliation. And in a way, that was its own kind of closure. It confirmed that the daughter I had loved and sacrificed for truly was gone, and the person who remained was someone I no longer knew, nor wished to. The silence was a relief. In the months that followed, A quiet sense of peace settled over me. Having my financial security restored was, of course, a huge weight off my mind. I was able to pay my bills without anxiety, buy groceries without counting pennies, and even start thinking about that new boiler. But more than the money, it was the restoration of my dignity that mattered most. I had faced betrayal from the person I loved most in the world, someone who saw me not as her mother but as an obstacle or an easy mark, and I had not crumbled. I had found an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. I had fought back, intelligently and resolutely, and I had won. Not a victory over Clara, because in that battle, we had both lost something precious, but a victory over injustice, a victory for myself. I used some of the recovered money to redecorate my little flat. I chose bright, cheerful colors, bought new curtains, and a comfortable armchair where I could sit and read by the window. I threw out the box labeled Clara, past. There was no point in dwelling on what was irrevocably broken. Instead, I focused on building a new, quieter, more authentic life for myself. I reconnected with old friends, joined a local book club, and started volunteering at the community garden. I found joy in simple things: the taste of a homegrown tomato, a good book, the laughter of friends, the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. Ms. Davies became a good friend. We'd meet for coffee occasionally, and she'd marvel at my resilience. "You're one of the strongest women I know, Margaret," she told me once, and her words warmed me more than any financial settlement could. I learned that strength isn't about never falling, it's about how you get back up. As for Clara and Mark, their life, from what little I heard, was not the glittering future they had envisioned. The scaled-down wedding was just the start. Mark's reputation in his financial circles had apparently suffered from the whispers surrounding the mismanaged funds, and his career prospects dimmed. They struggled financially, living in a small rented flat, a far cry from the grand house Clara had dreamed of. The strain, I was told, took its toll on their marriage. There was no joy in hearing this, no schadenfreude. Just a quiet sadness for the waste of it all, for the choices made and the paths taken. My pension, my security, was now truly mine, managed prudently, ensuring I could live out my days with the independence and dignity I had worked so hard for. Sometimes I would think about Clara, the bright little girl who loved stories and cuddles. I mourned that child, and I mourned the mother I had once been to her. But I did not mourn the loss of the grasping, selfish woman she had become. I had learned a harsh lesson about trust and betrayal, but I had also learned about my own resilience. I was no longer just Mum, the reliable pushover. I was Margaret Albright, a woman who knew her worth, who had faced down adversity, and who had reclaimed her life. And that, I realized, was a victory far sweeter than any revenge. My peace was hard-won, but it was real, and it was mine. And as I sit here now, in my sunny little living room, I can honestly say I wouldn't change the way I handled it. Not one bit.